What's good, everybody? Welcome to JFlow History, and in today's video we're going to be talking about AP Gov's Unit 1 Supreme Court cases. So without further ado, let's get started. Right off the bat, you'll notice we're going to be talking about 4 cases: Marbury versus Madison, McCulloch versus Maryland, Gibbons versus Ogden, and US versus Lopez. To the right, you'll also notice a whole bunch of other Supreme Court cases taken straight from College Board. These are the must-know cases, and in this episode we'll be talking about 3 of them. I included Gibbons versus Ogden for this unit because I thought it would be super helpful for y'all in understanding the fundamentals of AP Gov. Alright, let's get right into the first case you need to know, Marbury versus Madison. To start off, we need to talk about the context for this case. If you notice, the date is 1803, which is 3 years after the election of 1800. Now, why is that important? Well, for you A-Push and Hamilton lovers, you all might remember the election of 1800 as a peaceful transfer of power, where Federalist John Adams screwed up big time, making Democratic Republican Thomas Jefferson the next president of the United States. Another piece of context is the Judiciary Act of 1789, and yes, I know, that sounds pretty boring, but it gave the judiciary a power called a writ of mandamus. And what this writ of mandamus does is pretty much give the judicial branch the power to order a government official to complete their duty. So like if the government official is slacking, the courts can order them to speed it up. Now let's connect these 2 pieces of context into the story. So first, John Adams loses the election, but Jefferson doesn't just become president the next day. Oh no, it takes months before the new president officially takes office. So all that downtime in between is called the lame duck period. And in that downtime, Federalist John Adams has a sneaky plan. He knew that his Federalist Party was slowly dying out, but he could leave a footprint that would tamper with the Democratic Republicans for a long time to come. He could do this by filling out federal judicial seats with other Federalists. In fact, Marbury from Marbury versus Madison was one of those judges. However, due to laziness and miscommunication by the government, he never received his invitation. So Marbury goes out and demands to receive his position, but by this time Jefferson is already president and he has his Secretary of State James Madison say no. So Marbury takes Madison to court and demands for a writ of mandamus. The court actually sides with Marbury 4-0, but guess what? Marbury does not get the job because along with this ruling, the court came up with another announcement. John Marshall announced that the court's power to issue writs of mandamus was unconstitutional. So the court pretty much said, yeah, Marbury, you deserve your invitation, but we technically don't have the power to give you that. But if you notice, despite the court giving up the power of writs of mandamus, they gave themselves something much stronger, something so important that it becomes the purpose of the Supreme Court, the power to rule things unconstitutional. And that, my friends, is what we call judicial review. This is single-handedly the most important thing you need to know about the judicial branch. Judicial review, the power to determine if a law or act is constitutional. Alright, and for our next case, we have McCulloch versus Maryland. The most important piece of context to know is the Second Bank of the United States. The first one was introduced by Hamilton, but it expired, which led to the second one being created in 1816. Although many found the bust to be essential, it was still a highly controversial topic. Many people try to argue that the Constitution never listed a bust as one of the federal government powers, so it shouldn't be allowed. Now for the story. The federal government tries to open up another bust in Maryland. The people of Maryland don't quite like that, so they decide, why don't we leech off that bank and get some bonus money? That's where they then applied a tax that could do just that. If you're the federal government, you probably wouldn't like a state reaping off your revenue, so what do? They take it to court. In court, there are 2 things that get argued. McCulloch, who's on the side with the federal government, argues that a state can't tax something produced by the federal government. Maryland, on the other hand, argues that a Bank of the United States was unconstitutional in the first place. So guess what? With the court's newfound power of judicial review, they had the ability to make a decision on both claims. So how did the court rule? Well, they sided 6-0 with McCulloch stating that a bust was constitutional by the necessary and proper clause of the Constitution, and that a state could not tax a federal government bank because of the supremacy clause. To elaborate, the court pretty much said, even if not listed in the Constitution, the federal government has implied powers to execute whatever they need to do, and this also established federal law as being greater than state law. For our third case, Gibbons versus Ogden, the setting takes place in the rivers of New York, where Robert Livingston and Robert Fulton had a monopoly over the waterways there. That meant that they controlled the navigation of boats that came through those waters. You don't need to remember that, but it helps set the scene for the story. So for the story, Gibbons and Ogden decided to team up and buy a franchise which let them use part of the waterways that the 2 Roberts had a monopoly over. It went well for a little while, but their partnership broke apart like 2 best friends becoming incompatible. Ogden still had the license to use the waterways and get some money because he had the permit from New York, while Gibbons didn't. However, that didn't stop Gibbons from using the waterways. You see, Gibbons decided, alright, Ogden can take that New York permit, I'll just get one from the federal government. So he does that, and Ogden gets real confused and takes his old friend to court. So the big question the court has to decide was whose license was supreme, Gibbons' federal license or Ogden's state license. Well, as you all might remember from the Supremacy Clause in McCulloch versus Maryland, federal power is greater than state power, meaning that Gibbons' license wins. Ogden tries to argue that those were New York waters, meaning that New York had the power to regulate them, but the court said those rivers crossed state lines, therefore being examples of interstate commerce or commerce between two or more states. The Supreme Court ruled that because of the Commerce Clause in the Constitution, Congress had the ability to regulate the interstate commerce. This is going to give Congress some really big power because it means they will have the ability to deal with all sorts of business that relates between two different states. Now, our final case we're going to be talking about in this video is U.S. versus Lopez. The context about this case is the Gun-Free School Zone Act of 1990, a federal law that banned guns in school. I repeat, a federal law, not a state law. If you've been paying attention to federalism in your government class, you know that schools are state issues. So how does the federal government manage to make a law influencing a state issue? Well, they took it from the Commerce Clause. Congress's argument pretty much said that guns in school lead to violence, and that violence leads to people from other states deciding not to travel there. I know, that sounds like a real long stretch, because with that logic, Congress can pretty much make anything fall under the Commerce Clause. But before we dive deep into that debate, let's talk about the story. So Lopez, a student from Texas, decides to bring a gun to school so he could sell it. This obviously violated the Gun-Free Zones Act, and he was arrested under a federal crime. Lopez states that the Commerce Clause couldn't be used to make an act involving guns in schools. So how did the court rule? Well, unlike the other court cases discussed earlier, this one had some controversy. The court ruled 5-4, with the majority of the justices arguing that yes, Congress cannot use the Commerce Clause to put their foot into every issue around America. The effects of that ruling are huge because it lets Congress know that there is a limit to the amount of power they can exert with the Commerce Clause. They may have not specifically drawn a line to where their power ends, but they have showed that the power is not infinite. So in conclusion, we learn that in Marbury versus Madison, the most important thing to remember is judicial review, which allows the Supreme Court to determine whether something's constitutional or not. In McCulloch versus Maryland, that was the court case over the Bank of the United States, where it established that federal laws are greater than state laws. A good way to remember that case is to see that Maryland, a state, is to the right, so you can see it like a math equation. McCulloch, or federal laws, is greater than Maryland, or state laws. The other important thing to note is that it establishes that Congress has implied powers under the Necessary and Proper Clause, so they can do things that aren't specifically listed in the Constitution. Although this court case isn't essential to know, it is super helpful. Gibbons v. Ogden reestablished that the federal law is greater than state law, and it established that Congress can regulate interstate commerce under the Commerce Clause. Now that gave Congress a whole lot of power, but thankfully in the U.S. versus Lopez, it let them know that there is a limit, and they cannot just establish everything that barely even remotes with interstate commerce with the Commerce Clause. Alright, that's all I have for you in today's video. Thank you all for watching. Make sure to subscribe so you can see some more of this content. Let me know if there's anything I missed, anything I can improve upon, or anything else that you all want to know. And don't forget to keep chasing your goals, keep pursuing your dreams, follow your passion, and peace out.